If you spend any time in Linux spaces, you'll see top 5, top 10 best Linux distros of 2025 for beginners, best gaming distros for your toaster, top 3 ultimate, legendary, amazing, super incredible distros for your grandma. Let's just go to YouTube right now. Like, this is a really, really popular thing that people talk about, and I understand it, right? The whole idea of picking a distro is difficult, and there's a lot of them, and if you don't know what you're picking, it can be hard to decide what you want to use. Now, I have said many, many times that, frankly, your distro doesn't really matter. Yes, there are better choices you can make, but at the end of the day, if you don't like something, you've already installed one Linux distro, you can very easily install another one. So instead, I want to approach this from the other side. Distros that, as a new Linux user, I think it's probably best to avoid. Not because they are bad, but because they require a certain kind of user, or sort of eat into that initial experience, making it harder than it really needs to be. So let's get the obvious one out of the way and talk about Arch Linux. As you may know, this is what a daily drive, and you may also know, this is where I started. Arch is a very minimal, very lightweight distro, and when you first install it, you're just dropped into a terminal. There's nothing else on your screen. Unless you know what you need to install to get a desktop, you will not have a desktop. As you can see from, me starting with Arch, you absolutely can do so, but you need to know what you are getting into. On friendlier distros like Ubuntu and Fedora, some people consider RTFM, read the effing manual, to be like a mean thing to say to new users and sort of chases them away. You better get chased away if you're not ready to do so. On Arch, you will need to read documentation. You will need to read the Arch wiki. You will need to troubleshoot your own problems, and if you want to get help from people, you need to know what you are talking about, because otherwise, frankly, you're going to get mocked by people, and rightfully so, because Arch is not the place you should be. This is not to say that you can't use Arch. If you have a developer mindset, you're willing to learn, if you're a tinkerer, you like to break things apart, understand how a system works, Arch is a great choice for you. If that is not you, do not start with Arch. Some people get confused and think Arch Linux is hard. It's not hard. If you want to install it, all of the instructions are on the wiki, just follow it step by step. There's even a Python script, and you basically just click next, 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 and you're good to go. But you will need to understand how your system works, or be very willing to learn. Since we're here, let's also talk Gentoo Linux. Everything I said about Arch is also true about Gentoo. It's a very lightweight, very minimal system. When you first install it, you're dropped into a terminal unless you know what packages to install to get a desktop. You will be expected to read documentation, to work things out for yourself, understand how your system works, and know how to explain problems you have if you actually want to get help. At the same time as that, on Arch, this is a binary package system, so the software you install is already compiled, much like an exe over on Windows. On Gentoo, however, there are binary packages in the repo, but there isn't full coverage. So, for the most part, you will be expected to compile software yourself. Now, Gentoo has a lot of nice tooling to make this very easy, but there may be compilation issues. It is very common to want to go and mess with some of the compilation flags, and it's sort of expected that you understand what at least some of the basic flags will do, because you may want to go and change how many cores are being used to compile the application, change different features that are being added into the application, and again, if you're a developer and have a developer-y mindset, absolutely go and do so. Do note that because you are compiling things, installing software will take longer. People are going to say, oh, it doesn't take that long, and yes, it doesn't take that long, but naturally having to compile the software yourself is going to make updates take a bit longer, so if you're on maybe slower hardware, like, I don't know, a 5 or so year old laptop, just keep that in mind. it is going to be more of a time sink to do the same amount of work as pretty much any other distro. None of this to say, don't start on a rolling release distro. This is a distro where there isn't a set version of the distro that you upgrade to, like Ubuntu 24.04, Ubuntu 24.10, 25.04, so on and so forth. This is a distro where updates come out and you install the update. You can keep running the same version of Arch for 10 years, and you just keep getting more and more updates. If you want to do a rolling release, I would suggest maybe going with something like an OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, where out of the box, things are nicely pre-installed for you, and you can focus on learning things from a much friendlier starting point. Now, the next one I'm going to talk about isn't just a single distro, because frankly, I'm going to say the same thing about all of them in this group. I know that especially if you're a, maybe young developer, you're learning Python for the first time, the idea of hacking sounds really cool. And don't get me wrong, I am not trying to tell you, don't do pen testing, don't do anything like that. If that's what you want to do with your life, that is awesome. We need more ethical hackers. At the same time, though, don't be drawn to a distro that markets itself as a pen testing distro or hacking distro like Black Arch, Parrot Security, Fedora Security Lab, and of course, Kali Linux. All of these are incredible distros. They are incredible tools for people doing pen testing. And if you want to have a machine running them, absolutely. If you want to spin it up in a VM, absolutely. Should it be your first distro, your daily driver distro, though? No. In the same way that you shouldn't be using a hammer to cut up your chicken, these are tools with a very specific purpose. If you want to learn pen testing, if you want to do all that stuff, and maybe you do it, every second of the day, hey, in that case, it probably makes sense. But for most other people, don't be drawn to it because of the hacker aesthetic. These projects have gotten better at being a daily driver. As an example, with Kali Linux, a few years back, the main account you had was the root account. It wouldn't make a user account for you during the installation. So if you wanted one, you had to make one manually. Nowadays, it does go and do that. But even so, these are distros with a specific purpose, and much like with, say, Arch Linux, if you go around asking, how do I do gaming on this? How do I install this thing? How do I install that thing? A lot of people are going to say, why are you using this distro? Use literally anything else. Now, as you might be able to guess from the name, Linux from scratch, otherwise known as LFS, is a very serious project. But it's a very time-consuming project. I don't mean time-consuming like Arch or Gentoo. This is a whole nother level. So on Arch, on Gentoo, when you install it, you get a working Linux system. You have your kernel, you have all of the basic tools, you have systemd, you have your drives mounted, every nice little thing that you want to do. LFS really is Linux from scratch. So much so that you actually can't really install Linux from scratch without another Linux system. You use another Linux system to basically bootstrap everything you need. So compile your early tooling, compile your kernel, all of that stuff, get everything set up, and then once you're done, then you have your LFS system. And if you think you're compiling a lot on Gentoo, Gentoo at least starts with, again, a lot of that basic stuff done for you. Every single little thing you will need to compile on LFS. Sometimes you need to patch things as well. So if you want to learn how to do so, you can absolutely do it. But even by the end of the first LFS book, you will not have a desktop. Then you need to do BLFS. Then there are other books you may want to go through as well. This is less of a distro and more of a educational project, a learning project that really teaches you how a Linux system fits together. And it is written under the assumption that you have at least basic knowledge of Linux. You understand how a terminal works, you understand how commands work and options work and all that stuff. I know it might sound tempting, especially for a tinkerer or a developer, but just don't as your first distro. On your first time, it'll probably take you 20 or so hours just to have a working system. Just don't. Do it later. Do it once you understand things and want to learn more about your system. But don't start with it. Let's talk Alpine Linux. This is an amazing distro for containers, for servers, and for people that know why they want to use Alpine Linux. Most distros are built around the GNU toolchain and systemd. This makes use of musl libc and busybox, and also openrc. If you don't know what any of those words mean, Alpine Linux is not the place you should be. They deserve an entire video unto themselves, but the TLDR is a different way to build up those core components of a Linux distribution. And being different, they're going to operate in a different way, especially systemd and openrc. And most tutorials, most documentation is built around what most Linux distributions are using, the GNU toolchain and systemd. And if you go into Alpine without understanding why you're using a different toolset, you're gonna run into problems very quickly. Last but certainly not least, let's talk about NixOS. Oh, NixOS. NixOS is a very interesting project. So NixOS. So, this is a distro which approaches package installation and system management in a very, very different way. If you go from Ubuntu to Arch to Fedora to most other distros out there, the concepts you know, the commands might be different, but the concepts you know are gonna be pretty much the same. NixOS is a distro that manages everything through its weird packaging layout, weird system hierarchy, and none of this is bad. This is very much like Alpine Linux. If you know the benefits of Nix, if you're willing to understand what makes this a good system, the Nix people are going to embrace you. They very much like talking about how Nix makes everything better, Nix fixes everything. But as your first distro, my main reason to not recommend it is you're already going to be bogged down learning how Linux tools work, learning about Linux packages, learning about Linux software, and, you know, how your system fits together. To add on top of that, the way Nix packaging works, which is very specific just to Nix, unless you're very dedicated to the concept, I think it's better to save it until sometime down the line. At least give it a couple of months of getting used to the basics of Linux, and then give it another look. Again, none of this to say these can't be your first distros, but you need to know what you're getting into, and for the majority of people, frankly, I think they should be avoided, at least for a bit. At least till you're somewhat comfortable, or, you know, you have quite a bit of free time and you're willing to become comfortable. So, let me know your thoughts down below. I'm sure there are other distros, if you happen to be a Linux user, that you could suggest. I'd like to know what distros you think people should avoid as their first distro. Let me know down below. So, if you like the video, go like the video. If you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe, Liberapay, linked in the description down below. That's gonna be it for me, and distro. Yeah.
something like this.